Dr. Caldamone, I already saw his talk. It's absolutely phenomenal. So with no further ado, Dr. Caldamone will give us his ideas on peer review, et cetera.
It's called a setup, if I've ever seen one, right? Yeah. Well, I mean, first, before I start, I just have to say something. This is the first of this meeting that I've been to. And the only thing I can say is I'm very, very sorry they hadn't been to the other two, because just a phenomenal group of people to communicate with, to share ideas with. I think the format that you've set up as far as free paper presentations along with panels has just been tremendous. And my compliments to Ahmed, to Chris is back there, to Mark and the scientific committee. Just an extraordinary job. Well done. Okay, so peer review, open access, and predatory journalism. A little off the beaten path, no significant disclosures. So I was not much of a TV watcher, and certainly not syndicated TV. I really stick to sports mostly. But I was addicted to these four dysfunctional characters. And I would watch every single episode of Seinfeld Thursday night at 9:30. There was one particular episode that became very, very famous. It was called The Parking Garage. And The Parking Garage is a story about these four who go off to a shopping mall and then come back and can't find the car. And the whole episode basically is them wandering around the parking garage looking for the car, to the point where Jerry's bladder gets very, very full. And he's encouraged to relieve himself in the corner of the parking garage, only to be caught by a security guard. So he's caught by a security guard and he's arrested. So he goes down to the police station and he gets off the claim, he gets released by saying he has a urological condition called uromycetitis, in which he describes this as extreme urinary urgency, to the point where sometimes you have to empty your bladder in public places. Okay, so put that in the back of your mind for just a minute, okay? And let's move on to peer review. Peer review originated in 1665 with the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London. And the purpose of it at the time was to prevent authors from submitting fictitious works, because it was very, very prestigious to have a paper published in this particular journal. JAMA and Lancet adopted peer review, but only about 100 to 150 years later, actually. I think the goals of peer review are pretty obvious: to ensure high quality research is published and disseminated to interesting parties, improve sub-quality manuscripts by constructive criticism. But there are also some perils of peer review that we have to pay some attention to. It's slow and expensive. Estimates that it probably costs about $1.9 billion per year, or 25% of the total cost of production, is devoted to peer review. It's time-consuming, as all of you know in this room, because you all do it. There's inconsistencies as well, and by their very nature, reviews are subjective, and some experts may view data a little bit differently than others. For instance, this is a review of a particular author, of a reviewer that decided to reject an article. Pretty short review, as I would say, but he talks about a novel approach, appropriate introduction, provides good insight, and then he rejects the article. The same article by reviewer number 2 also rejected it. This was his review, or her review. 3 full pages of criticisms of the article, but if you read this really, really closely, it's how to make the article better. So you can see the variability from reviewer to viewer that we have to deal with, and the inconsistency is a significant problem. There's also bias built into the system. We have to face that. As mentioned yesterday by Elise, and I think by Lewis as well, no, I think it was Emily actually who mentioned this, negative studies are rarely published. The fact is that negative studies are rarely submitted, because they know they're probably not going to get published, I would imagine. There's oftentimes claims of bias against good English grammar as well, and we see that pretty commonly, and it's a difficult problem to overcome. And finally, there's some degree of reviewer and editor bias as well. Because when you think about it, when an editor is assigned to a particular manuscript, who does he invite to review? He invites people who have experience with that particular topic. Well, that may in and of itself present a conflict of interest. I love this cover of The Lancet from 2011, which said that the most entrenched conflict of interest in medicine is a disinclination to reverse a previous opinion. I think that's very, very true. There's author and institutional bias as well, I think, on the part of the authors. This is sometimes called the Matthew effect. The Matthew effect comes from this verse from the Bible, which says, "For to everyone who has will, more will be given, and he who will have abundance. But from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away." So this is an interesting paper that was published in 1982. They did a study where they took 12 published studies in previously from very, very prestigious institutions and very, very prestigious authors. They retyped the manuscripts and reformatted the manuscripts. They had minor changes in the title, changes in the authors, and they assigned less prestigious institutions to the publication. Then they resubmitted them to the same exact journal that had accepted them. So what happened? 3 out of the 12 journals recognized that this had previously been submitted and rejected it. 8 of the 9 who did not recognize it rejected it as well because of poor quality, not because of lack of originality. So clearly there's some bias in terms of institutions and authors that publish frequently. And then there's a theoretical concern with peer review of abuse of the peer review process by theft of ideas. I don't know if that's a common thing in medicine. I think it is something that in the scientific world in general people worry about. How much of a practical problem is, I can't say for sure. Now let's step back for just a second and look at the routine business model of journalism and magazines. How does the system work? The journal pays a writer. The journal pays editors to commission articles, to shape and check the articles as well. Then they pay to distribute the articles to subscribers and to retailers. And the profits for any given magazine come from the sales and the advertisements. And a successful magazine profit is somewhere between 12 and 15%. Not bad, even if you put these guys on the cover. Scientific journalism business model is completely different. Think about it. Scientists create the work, use their own funding, usually from institutions or federal agencies. They give their work to the publisher for free, including the copyright. The bulk of the editorial burden is on the shoulders of everyone in this room, and that is the peer review process, which is completely free to the journal as well. And then the publisher sells the product back to the government and institutions through their libraries. These are the same institutions that funded the research to begin with. The Deutsche Bank looked at this in 2005 and said, this is a bizarre triple pay system. And how bizarre is it? Well, in 2010, Elsevier, the largest medical publisher, had a 36% profit margin, which was greater than Apple, Google, or Amazon that year. It works very, very well. You couple the perils of peer review with the profitability of scientific publication, and you can understand why the big push is towards open access publishing. This is a very good article if you did not see it. It appeared in European Urology by Chris Bain and Mike Shea that advocated for open access, describing it as an egalitarian paradigm, which actually shifts us from a pay-for-reading paradigm to a pay-for-publishing paradigm. And there are significant advantages to open access as well. These are peer-reviewed articles. It's been shown in many studies that open access articles are cited more frequently than those that are behind the payer wall. In those situations where an article starts off behind a payer wall and then is brought out to open access, there's been a post-embargo citation bump in citations as well. Why? I think it's pretty clear, because open access manuscripts can be read anywhere by anyone at any time. Under current funding paradigms that are set up by publishers, an article processing charges anywhere from $1,500 to $5,000. The average is about $3,000. And moving forward, this is going to have to be factored into the research grants that you receive in order to cover those costs as well if we were to sustain an open access process. But as with anything in the business world, things can get turned upside down. And open access has morphed into something called predatory journalism. Now let's get back to the Seinfeld episode for just a minute in the parking garage and the diagnosis of uromycetitis. Well, you probably guessed it. In 2017, there was an article published on uromycetitis, poisoning results in lower urinary tract infection and acute renal failure, a case report. Completely fabricated. It was received by this journal, Urology and Nephrology Open Access Journal, in March 22nd and was published on March 31st. Now, looks like a beautiful, well-formatted article like we always see, but look at it a little bit more closely and you'll find some things that are pretty curious. One of the co-authors is George Costanza. And George Costanza is, of course, one of the characters in Seinfeld. Our primary author is George Steinbrenner, former owner of the New York Yankees. They cite journals such as the Mexican Journal of Urology, non-existent, and Lancet Urology, also non-existent, completely fabricated, published, and in PubMed. So what's the definition of predatory journalism? Predatory journalism is journalism that's misrepresented as gold open access journals. They submit an article, they pay a fee, they get it published. And it has a lack of scholarly publication standards, which we would call the peer review system. The growth has been explosive. Why? Because there's a market need. There are hundreds of thousands of scientists around the world that need to publish to earn tenure and promotion. It's a publish or perish world out there in academics. Maybe not so much in our field of pediatric urology, but certainly in science in general. But the result is, of course, that any article can get published for a fee today, whether it's plagiarized work or fictitious work such as uromycetitis. But these journals can sometimes be difficult to identify because the titles are very, very complex. They're nicely formatted in PDF documents. They oftentimes will describe a vigorous peer review process, but you'll never see an actual written peer review that will be sent back to you. And many of these journals have fake impact factors also. You get these in your mailbox all the time, don't you? And just about every day you get a request to submit an article to a journal. They don't tell you that it costs you money to submit that article, though. Or sometimes you get asked to be on the editorial board as well, right? You get these once a week. Wouldn't that look good on your CV? You're on the editorial board of the Journal of Pediatrics and Neonatology. Why not? This was an excellent article that was written by Ferdado Kelly, Nicholas Fernandez, who's sitting right here. Maybe he could have some comments about it in the discussion section, and Marty Coyle, in which they looked at a period of time where they saw a significant increase in the number of pediatric urology papers that were cited in PubMed. But there's only been about a 25% of those actually were published in open access. And that was pretty stable over the course of the 4 or 5 years of the study. Almost 7% of the publications could be considered in predatory journals, however. There are sites where you can get information about the validity of a journal. You can go to the Urology Green List, or you can access a site called Think, Check, and Submit, which will give you their impression as to whether this represents predatory journalism or not. So what's the solution? I think the concept of open access is a very good concept. I think peer review will remain the gold standard of scientific assessment as time goes on because it's our best way to ensure and improve good science. But I also think that we can do it better. And I think we can do peer review better in a variety of different ways, by standardizing the review process, structuring reviews, more reviewer training, et cetera, in order to make the process better. I think we should be advocating for open repositories for scientific publications, whether they're through academic institutions or academic independent agencies. And this is being mandated, actually, in Europe, as many of you in this room may already know, because there's a Coalition OA standing for Open Access, S standing for Shock, that's come out with Plan S. And Plan S is requiring that any research that's funded by a national agency be published in an open access format by year 2021. Some of them will go through an embargo period of a year and then become open access, or some will pay a fee up front and be open access right from the start. And medical publishers such as Elsevier are negotiating with these, negotiating with these types of organizations right now in order to facilitate this. So this is in Europe right now. It involves 12 European countries, but I'm certain it's something that we'll see in many, many countries in the near future. Thank you very much.